We are going to talk about how this information flows from the DNA to the rest of the cells, to the rest of the body. And so anyhow, the little circle inside is the nucleus of the cell. Every cell has, and every human cell has a nucleus. But so the DNA is kept in there. And at the proper time, is going to unzip in a little section of the DNA, comes out with the instruction to do whatever needs to be done, a new protein, a new molecule, a new tissue, whatever. And you can see that the DNA is over here. This is the picture of the DNA, the lower strand, and it's producing a protein, a long chain of protein. But one of the things that the reason why I wanted to use this, one of the things that the scientists that are promoting or the people that are promoting the mRNA vaccine is, they said that there is no way that RNA is going to go back into the nucleus to join the DNA. You have injected something new. We do not know, scientifically or medically, we do not know that RNA that you injected is not going to end up in the double helix DNA. So I wanted to use that for that purpose. So there are a lot of things. The major, from the scientist perspective, the major problem that I see is that this is new. We do not know. We cannot say with certainty this is not going to happen because we don't know. We have to wait many years, 10 years, 20, maybe even 30, to see that this indeed is not happening. Because a lot of tragedies have happened with humanity by speculating or guessing. That is not good science. We need to have the information, the physical results that something is or is not happening. And it's a very risky proposition to hope that RNA is not going to make it back to recombine with the original DNA that you had in your body. We don't know that.
So that's a real risk.
It is a high risk.
And this is significant. Is this one of the things that made you really upset when you heard about mRNA being used as the platform for this shot?
I think I really don't like to speak. Again, as a scientist, I don't like to speculate. I like to see the results, especially when you're dealing with health issues, especially when you're dealing with human life.
So what you're saying is that there hasn't really been enough time to find out if there will be any adverse effects. That's what upsets you.
And it could take, as I say, it could take a very long time, 20, 30 years. And after 20, 30 years, when you get a problem, how are you going to link it back to the vaccine that you took 20, 30 years ago?
So the liability for the government, they're covering their tail really good, basically, is what we're saying.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, all of us have had the experience of watching TV when the ads come on for anything medical. You know, warts, make your warts fall off, I don't know. Something you take, it's going to clear up this and that. I love the legal stuff at the end, you know. I just love it. I heard one time, you know, they were talking about, you know, shortness of breath, sleepiness, don't do this, and they say it real fast. And they had inserted in there a propensity for gambling. I thought, who's going to run out to the store and take this stuff, you know, after? But the thing is, and we talked about this, and I want to get your comments. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about RNA-based vaccines and what's unique about it. But you pointed out to me how that whenever a product, a medical product that's supposed to affect your health, help your body, and I think most of us thought that most medicines we take help our body do what it's supposed to do, which is heal itself.
Yes.
So that's kind of the basis of, say, precision medicine. So you pointed out how that whenever these products finally do go through the FDA and all the different levels of improvement so that they can be sold to the American public, you have all these warnings at the end. We remember a year ago when these vaccines, there was never one caution. Has anybody? I have never heard a single, your ear may fall off, you might get a second dose, any of that, nothing, nothing about gambling. So, but we are literally, and this is, I think, what concerns most people. We're not anti-vaxxers. We're not saying don't take the vaccine. I just think
there's definitely some anti-vaxxers in the room right now.
There might be. There probably are. I obviously.
You're outnumbered here, man.
I'm trying to not get kicked off social media, but that may be a losing proposition. The point is, the point is that we are literally being, not just by government agencies, but by different sectors of the public. We'll definitely be talking about this in our third session next week. We are being threatened and accused of killing grandma, endangering the public because, I say we, I'm going to speak as someone who's not taken the vaccine or has said I'm not going to take the vaccines or I'm not decided but I haven't done it yet. So we are being told, well, you're going to kill, but we haven't heard a single warning, not one, and yet there's all kinds of anecdotal evidence out there that there have been negative reactions to these vaccines. So, and they are not being broadcast, they're not being talked about.
Let me jump in to say earlier, we referred to, we started to refer about what those numbers. Gateway Pundit, one of our elders here, sent me a report that more people had died from the vaccine in the last 2 weeks in COVID. Reuters and AP came against that. But the update is, here's the update. There was a communication error where it was reported that over 12,000 have died from the vaccine. CDC has come out saying that was an error. The real number is only over 6,000. That was Daniel Bernard researched that. Thank you for doing that in the break there.
So apparently there's a critical mass. 6,000 is acceptable, above 6,000. So here's the question, Doctor, for you. And it's like 3 or 4, and I'll just group them together. I know you can handle them all at the same time. Number 1 would be, are RNA-based vaccines something new? Next part is, are all COVID-19 vaccines RNA-based? Can, number 3, RNA-based vaccines affect people's DNA? And without getting too technical, maybe some kind of, at least, simple answer, because we hear that a lot. And then finally, are the COVID-19 vaccines real vaccines in the sense that the American public is used to using the term, like when we were kids, we got the polio vaccine and that sort of thing. So are they the same thing? And if they are, good, tell us. If they're not, what is the difference? So are RNA vaccines something new? Are COVID-19 vaccine shots all based on RNA process? And can they affect the DNA? And how do they differ from traditional vaccines, if at all?
The mRNA, the synthetic mRNA is definitely new. We have never used it before. This is the first time that it's been used in humans. Of course, for many years, we have synthesized RNA for other purposes, but never for a vaccine. So this is new. Are all of the COVID-19 vaccines based on mRNA? The answer is no. I think Johnson & Johnson is based on the virus, the traditional technology of just using.
But that's the one that people, especially in Europe, have a problem with.
Yeah,
the
which is very interesting.
Yeah.
I guess the follow-up to that doesn't mean that is a vaccine with no problems. It's different, but that doesn't mean that it has no problems. Yes, the answer to the first question is yes. This is new. It is the first time, and I think that's really the major reason why people, including me, are concerned about the long term. And it's the thing about the genetic information in the DNA. It's just when I first started saying, I grew up in the beautiful mountains of Colombia with a huge diversity of nature, and I love nature, and I respect nature. Amen. Because it is the creation of God. It's created perfectly, and to go in and start messing up with it is something that even at the highest level of scientific knowledge, we should just leave it alone. Because the price is too high.
Dr. Bonilla, emphasizing one of these points, the term real vaccine versus traditional vaccines. When President Trump first came out and said we're going to accelerate the process of developing a vaccine, I think everybody's hope elevated because our trust in the word vaccine. Now, my anti-vaxxer friends.
There's a majority here, my friend.
I've never had that trust. Power of the people I know. So, but at any rate, but I think most people that just grew up, you know, in the Leave It to Beaver, America thought the word vaccine was, oh, we'll go get the vaccine, then we're not going to have to worry about polio anymore. Is RNA-based vaccines that we're seeing now, introduced for the first time, is that something different? Should it be called something other than a vaccine? Are we stretching and elasticizing the term vaccine? Does the American public need to have a little education about what these terms now mean? Because today, all the different strife and contention going on in our society, 80% of it can be laid at the feet of nomenclature, terminologies being used to manipulate the public with, and we need to update our understanding of what these terms mean.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, labeling is like when you go to the grocery store and you see the label organic, people run to that organic and that want to get good quality produce. And something similar is happening with the RNA used. What happened is we got a bad taste about GMOs, about genetically altered products. And so that has kind of, in fact, a lot of companies do not want to label GMO, even though it could be GMO. They don't want to label it GMO because they are concerned that the public is not going to purchase it. Right. So it has a bad name, a bad reputation. And so now that we are talking, that is genetic engineering that just on purpose was changed to result into something resistant to insects or resistant to whatever, and that is a major problem that we have. Genetic engineering it really has a bad name. So now we can change it to gene therapy, and that doesn't sound as bad as genetic engineering.
Who doesn't love therapy?
In principle, it is the same.
So instead of, as a follow-up to your question, Nick, what would you call this shot? Well, we know what we call it. What would you call it? What do you think is a more accurate scientific term for what the government is in the pharmaceutical companies are calling a vaccine?
I would label it gene therapy.
Okay, so the government is demanding gene therapy that we deal with a virus that has over 99% survival rate. We're all being demanded to have DNA altered, possibly altered. That's interesting. So gene therapy, you think that's the more accurate term?
I would say because you're intentionally introducing something, a genetic material that doesn't belong there. looking to achieve a result that we don't really have much experience. We don't know really what is going to be the result. We know that there have been a lot of casualties, but we don't in the short term. But we don't know really. What my concern is, as a scientist, is going to be much worse in the next generations. Second or third generation, we are going to see much worse results.
Wow, did you catch that? Can you say that one more time, just so people were sleeping back here, I think. I know how this works. Can you say that last statement one more time?
Well, you are incorporating genetic material into the human body. You are injecting something synthetically produced, which is an mRNA, which is a genetic material. And that is going to, one way or another, disturb the magnificent DNA that is in your body with the blueprint of who you are. It's going to alter. And it's not going to manifest itself until new generations.
Dr. Bonilla, let me ask you a question. So if I take NyQuil and let's say I have some over-acidic problem in my stomach or whatever, the alcohol in the stuff, or there's something in there, my body might react in an adverse way that I feel some pain or I've got some discomfort or something. But that's not going to penetrate into a cellular level change. Is that correct? Whereas what we're talking about is introducing RNA. In other words, we're introducing a substance that's going to talk to our body on a cellular level.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
That is the major concern that I would have, introducing genetic material that has been synthesized with a specific information in it, because that's what it is. The mRNA is just transferring information to produce,
right,
in this case, a protein.
I think that, I'll speak for myself, but I think I speak for probably most people. That thought might not scare a lot of people because they do feel resilient and they do have these wonderful, God-given machines, and the body can adapt. It can screen out. It can cut the proteins, like you said, and probably survive that RNA invasion into their body. But do you know that you're that person? Do you know that you're not that person?
Every life matters. 99.5% is too much. The 0.5% that die is too much, they're telling us.
That's the point. And there is the legitimate reason why America should remain a free country where individual citizens have a right to decide how they want to treat themselves medically.
Preacher, brother. Come on. Let's give Pastor Nick. That's a good word.
When he's mentioning generations, in our discussions, we talked about, now I don't know if that means generations of new blood cells or generations as in our children. I'm sure that's what you're referring to.
Yes.
But one of the things that you mentioned was we might see some real manifestations in 2 to 4 years here. In those what are your concerns there? Because I think if we relate back to what you said prior to this, was that you said we really don't know.
Yes.
What the mRNA will do. What will it attempt to do when the body is not recognized it, when it's being in its essence rejected? How does that manifest in the body? And we're yet to know how what could happen. Well, we know some ways. We see the problems. We see 10,000 youth supposedly now have inflamed hearts. We see over 6,000 dead, and many, many, many others. People have seen the palsy and everything else. We've seen the videos and so forth. We're already seeing some of that manifest as more immediate.
Yes.
But what kind of things might we? I don't want to be, being subjecting to things that but what kind of problems? You mentioned that nothing could happen, but what beyond that are possibilities? I guess in the rather than the next generation, we're talking about now.
it's very hard to guess how a person might respond, because the immune system, even the immune system, is different in different people. For example, let's go back to your wonderful example of the NyQuil. That level of alcohol could affect some people and not others. And you can just tell that everyone is different and is going to respond different. So from the medical perspective, for me, it would be hard to say you're going to react immediately, or it's going to be 3 days or 3 months, or because it really depends on your specific the condition of your immune system. How is it going to react and at what level? And again, we just see that every day, that some people react very quickly, some people die, and some people stay alive.
But there is a potential that there could be down the road problems.
Absolutely. There is, from my knowledge and perspective, just from what I know in terms of passing on genetic traits, that's going to happen. If your DNA gets altered in any way, that's going to be transferred to the next generations.
That's significant.
Absolutely, and that's really when I have a chance to talk to people, whether they are professionals or just people of the street on the street, that is my major concern. And the sad part is that when something tragic happens in 10, 20 years, to make the link, nobody's going to believe you. How do you make that link? That the reason why my child was born with a faulty heart, or only one lung, or half of a kidney not working, something, and these are only examples, but how do you prove to anyone that the cause was the vaccine that you took 20 years ago? It's just a high risk, and again, we are playing with something so holy. We are playing with something so perfect. The language of God. Again, I mentioned that because this is an interesting book, and this is the guy that completed the Human Genome Project. That's one of the books that he wrote, The Language of God, and it's what it is.
The language of God?
The language of God.
So one of the guys who worked on the Genome Project wrote a book called The Language of God.
The director.
The director of the Genome Project?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about some of the brightest scientists in the world acknowledge our God.
It is an amazing thing. I think from my perspective, I'm in awe every time that I see something so marvelous and so perfect that God has created for us. And if you don't believe in God, then you can say just Mother Nature, whatever you refer to. But it's a perfection from nature. There is no other way to put it. It's just a wonderful creation.
What's interesting when I'm listening to him and speaking for himself and then referring to this guy who is the chairman of the Genome Project, I want to make sure I get it right.
Yeah, he was I guess the director. And he's actually the director of the National Institute of Health. He stepped from being the director of the Human Genome Project into being the director of the National Institute of Health.
What I hear about him and this gentleman is that a reverence for God, a reverence for the things of creation, and a faith in that creation that we can heal ourselves, and we have the potential to heal ourselves with the other resources that God has placed. When you have people who don't have that worldview like that, they go down a path of where we are now. You know, did God say, the serpent said to Eve, did God really do this? No, we don't believe in God. So therefore, they go down a path that's misguided. When you go deeper, the guys who know the most about the human genome are raising the alarm. That's what I'm hearing. The people who know the most about it are raising the alarm. And not only that, but they have in their studies and their depth of scientific research, it takes them to a place of reverence and respect for God. And that's an amazing statement for me, to hearing him say that. Let's give God praise for that. When we dig deeper, we find God with even greater clarity.
About a year and a half ago, Doctor, we were first learning about coronavirus, COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't take long for the issue to become politicized. If we remember what was happening and where we were all at. And we saw this really very important issue begin to quickly be very managed. The expressing of it, the sharing of the information became extremely managed. And it took a little while, and when you and I met for breakfast, you really expressed this. And I kind of want to get your comments about this specific point that I want to bring up. Early on, when it first came out, physicians, people in the medical community begin to talk about treatments. Now, this speaks to what we were opening up with in the last session, the difference between herd mentality medicine, versus precision medicine,
Yes.
personalized medicine, which respects that each person's different. That's why you have to have a doctor that knows you physically and can do his best, or a team do their best to prescribe, tailor medical results for you. They don't just give you what they've given to everybody else. So, speaking to that, in the very beginning, I remember seeing ads on TV and interviews where people were talking about treatments. A lot of different treatments were floated out there. And people in the medical community said, doctors were early on dealing with this sickness, and they were finding certain, cocktails that were helping.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's also, and there was beginning to become some discussion about, and I probably shouldn't use the word herd immunity because I've used the word herd negatively, but the idea that as we have done with other similar cases in the past, as these issues pass through humanity, we begin to develop immunity, and as a society.
Yeah.
And so there's this kind of built-up immunity as it passes through us, and we survive the storm and we rebuild. However, I noticed that almost within a month or two, all of that was shut down. I could not hear, it's certainly not coming from at the health department or any representation of the government. Everything got shoved into one 2-lane road.
Yeah.
Masks and vaccines. Mask and vaccine. There's your answer. We don't want to hear about anything else. There is nothing else to talk about. And I don't know about you, but I, for one, begin to feel the heavy hand of being railroaded. I thought, where in the world has our scientific advanced society, where have they all gone? Why is there no talk of alternatives? The word alternative never showed up.
Yes.
Any kind of conversation about how you can treat yourself or protect yourself. If I knew I was going to get COVID, I would want some physicians or some specialists to tell me, well, Nick, this is the best way you could survive this. This is nothing but a weaponized cold.
Yeah.
And by the way, let me just as a side note, you might find this interesting. A number of weeks ago, I was in the emergency room being treated for COVID. And the doctor that came in and talked to me was a wonderful guy, and he sat down and he said, let me just share with you a little bit about COVID and the history of it. So I was feeling pretty awful, but I was interested in what he had to say. He said, this virus has been with us for thousands of years. It's called the cold virus. He said it's the common cold, and I kind of looked at him, and so he said, he says the common cold has lived and it has morphed through the generations for thousands of years with humanity. And then he said a funny thing happened. All of a sudden, a couple of protein molecules came along and attached themselves to the cold virus, and we got COVID.
Was there a red flag on those proteins that attached it like a
You
little
know,
red?
yeah,
like a
yeah,
sickle?
there was a little crescent, right? Yeah,
I'm here to cause trouble, and I do a pretty good job. of it.
PRC. Yeah, that had the little. So, but the point is, he just said that quickly. Being a doctor on duty and everything, he didn't want to elaborate, but it certainly wasn't wasted on me. After thousands of years, all of a sudden, a couple proteins go floating through the air and end up weaponizing the cold virus. You get COVID-19. But that's water under the bridge. The point is that, and I'd really like to get your comment about this, is there was almost what seemed to me a shutdown of any conversation about building up the immune system in preparation for this. So, doctor, just all of this, you know, we're all feeling quite pushed around, threatened, but from a medical and scientific standpoint, why, and am I wrong in saying that it was not only inappropriate, but it wasn't good science to immediately take all of those things off the table? Building up your own immune system, treatments, all that stuff just got taken away. You put that, you know, mask on, and you get in line and take those vaccines, and you'll be approved. And now they're taking the vaccines, they're telling them put the mask back on. But you know.
Well, it's really, it doesn't make sense, even just at the raw human perspective, because as you mentioned it, we all know that the virus has been with us for thousands of years. But it has by nature, it mutates. That's one of the things that makes it different from, although really in many ways, every living thing mutates, but the virus changes much quicker. So the problem is you humbly accept the vaccine, and then a new variant, which was one of the questions that was asked, a new variant comes in a month, you have to do it again. Right. It doesn't make sense. What would make sense is if we do not focus on the virus, but focus on the immune system. And say, okay.
That's good.
Because if we have a strong immune system, nothing is going to bother us. Like the traditional flu, you'll put you down for a day or two, but you come back healthy and immune because of the antibodies that you produce. That should be the focus. A healthy immune system that will survive anything and everything. Because the virus comes and goes, and a new one will come tomorrow or next week. And then you have to go through that's what I was labeled. I have labeled slavery to the virus, because every time that a new virus comes, you have to put a new vaccine, whether it's in a month, 6 months, whatever. It doesn't make sense, even from the just raw human perspective, much less from a scientific and medical perspective. It just doesn't make sense.
We had mentioned in the previous session the concept of designer babies, gene, genetic, experimentation. And you again, alluding to the fact that if you change the nomenclature, change the way you talk about something, all of a sudden, like sleight of hand, people will look over in another direction and bypass the obvious. So, you said, well, instead of genetic engineering, which scares people, they just simply changed the term to gene therapy, because who doesn't like a little therapy every now and then? So, when we met that morning, you talked a little bit about a lot of the really fast-paced research in gene therapy, genetic engineering, was being done, probably most of it here in the United States, just because of the availability of research labs and such.
Yeah.
Could you comment, and we'll probably pick this up a lot more in the next session, but comment a little bit about, you said something that morning that really caught my interest. You said a lot of that experimentation that was going on in the U.S. Began to run up against the restrictive guidelines of the FDA and that long and tedious process of approving. And so a lot of that research began to go offshore and begin to leave the U.S. Could you comment a little bit about that and how that has perhaps impacted where we're at today?
It is my understanding that right now, China sent a lot of scientists. It's no mystery to anyone that China sends a lot of scientists to the U.S. to get trained in the newest technology available. And then they go back to implement it back in China. My understanding is that right now, China is actually at a higher level than the U.S. in terms of genomic research, in terms of the open ground to use genetic engineering. It's really unlimited, the things that you can do with genetic engineering now, because we know so much. I mentioned that it took 7 very advanced countries technologically. It took them over 12 years to develop all this knowledge. It's just absolutely mind-boggling, the amount of knowledge that we have available. It is absolutely unthinkable, the amount of knowledge that we have available at our fingertips. As I say, in principle, you can change anything and everything that you want, in principle.
On the DNA and the RNA.
On the DNA, which is going to change your expression. You can make taller, shorter, faster, slower, just by genetic engineering. It is something that is absolutely amazing, again, because the volume of work that took scientists from 7 countries working together around the planet to develop this.
You're saying, though, that the lion's share of genetic research today is being done in the People's Republic of China?
It has shifted. A lot of the knowledge was developed here, but I believe it's probably because of the factor that you mentioned, that over here there is a little more control, there is a little more restriction, and that can be exasperating to people that want to do things with no limits. Yeah. So that has been taken out of the U.S.
So I don't think it's a shock to anybody that in the People's Republic of China there is a lot less of a respect for human life, and so the opportunity to experiment on people, and you just don't run into those kinds of things. That's not an area of your expertise, I understand.
But that's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because you originally mentioned about the designer babies, and that's where it took place, in China, because it's much less restrictions, although at the time that this became public, the scientists that actually did the work to produce 2 genetically engineered babies, he was not well received from the international community. And one of the things that most people don't notice is that when you move at a high level on scientific work, all of a sudden the international walls dissolve. Like when I was working in synthetic DNA and RNA, we have people from India, from Russia, and there is no such a thing as labeling, oh, you're Russian communist. It's because all of us start to walk on the same level. There are no international barriers.
So there are obviously, though, fewer barriers in China to the research process than if you're researching, say, RNA, DNA, genomics, for the purpose of taking it to market, you have a lot more hurdles that you have to get over than you would if you were offshore, and particularly in China, for example.
I like to believe that, in fact, from the scientists that I know that are involved in that area of research, if you talk to true dedicated scientists, they will stand off and they will say, just don't do it, because it's just, you are not going to like the results.
Has aborted fetal tissue been used in the development of these vaccines?
I cannot tell for sure, but I know if that was the case, it would be the traditional Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Because the reason why I would guess that, and again, as a scientist, I don't want to guess, but the reason why I would guess that is the traditional vaccine.
What traditional means you basically take part of the virus, and insert it into a...
Formulate it into a vaccine that you will actually inject into the human being.
Okay.
That's what the traditional vaccine is. You are injecting a microorganism, a lot of times particles, a lot of times treated in such a way that it's not going to do too much harm.
Okay.
That is not totally alive and product.
What we know definitively, those who really study vaccines, that aborted fetal tissue is used extensively on a lot of vaccines. That everyone who's done that research knows that that's a fact. That's one of the reasons why my daughter, for example, is rabid anti-vaxxer, because of that's happening. And I think some of that has changed, but still there's a lot of that that's happened. And there's a connection between the money and the abortion industry and the vaccine industry. So I don't want to muddy the water with that. But let's move on. Daniel, if you don't mind, why don't you just walk us through the Q&A section?
2 parts, and I'll be quick. My name's Yvette, and so my first question is, as a scientist and a doctor, how frustrating has it been for you to watch your cohorts sit back on the sidelines and not speak up and talk about the crimes against humanity that's happening? We truly have the largest human experiment happening in the history of our world. So how frustrating is it for you to watch your colleagues sit aside and keep their mouth closed?
It's been difficult, and that's one thing that I share with these 3 brothers here. Is I was silent in the closet, hoping that this will go away quick. But when I saw a few months ago that it's not going away quick, I say it's time to come out and say that's not what a good scientist stands for.
So I think there needs to be a change of our language, and I think as I talk in my groups, we need to speak out, step up, and show up, and we need to really change the vocabulary and stop taking the PCR test and educate people why they don't need to take it, number one, and stop calling it a vaccine. So we really need to get educated. So I didn't hear you say anything about the PCR test. I know about the cycle threshold. I know about the inventor and what he said. So any thoughts on that?
PCR is just a technique that has been used for a long time, and especially in the microbial world, essentially to enhance, to multiply tissues and to make it easier to, in fact, I guess that's one technique that is being used now to identify if you have the virus or not. Because what you're doing is just multiplying to make it easier to detect.
Right, but the inventor of the PCR test, and this is what has been said and been written about, said do not use this test for infectious disease. And they've been amplifying the cycles, and they've been spinning them way too many times. So they should have spun them less than 17, but further than that, they shouldn't even use this test because they haven't isolated the virus.
My name is Paul. I'm just curious. I'm into ozone therapy. And I was wondering if you knew anything about that as far as fighting the virus.
It is possible. I'm not really acquainted with that technique, but essentially it would be to sterilize. But I would say that there are better approaches to essentially sterilize and enhance your immune system. But I guess to answer directly, I don't know much about it. I know that what it will do, but I don't know much about the efficiency or anything like that.
Okay, thanks.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Laura, mucho gusto. Quick question. Okay, so you're saying that we should be focusing on strengthening the immune system more so than the vaccine. Okay, now basically to strengthen our immune system is, you know, eat well, exercise, blah, blah, blah. What should we really be doing aside from that? What should we be taking? Like, for example, I'm a flight attendant. I travel all over. I'm exposed. Not once have I gotten sick. Do you know what I do? High doses of D3, high doses of vitamin C. That's it. Is there anything, you're saying strengthen our immune system. What do you know? What is the secret?
They're actually, again, I am into natural.
Right.
And when I say natural, I mean medicinal plants. And there is a long list. we have a witness here.
I think what we'll do is, because I know you were kind of alluding to it, we'll publish. We'll put a list together with moringa and some of these other things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure, my name's Jake. Thank you for your time today. I was looking up this question on NebraskaMedicine.com. I'm not sure if the answer is true. Maybe you know if it's true. It's asking, can the COVID-19 vaccines change your DNA? The 4-sentence answer is no. DNA is stored in the nucleus of your cells. mRNA vaccines do their work outside of the nucleus in the cytoplasm and have not been observed to interact with the nucleus. The cell breaks down and gets rid of the mRNA soon after it's finished using the instructions. Is this true?
Here is the answer to your question. And this is, in fact, I think this slide is used by the Human Genome Project. You can see for a long time, so I guess depends on where they got the information from. For a long time, just in the last few years, for a long time we thought that the way this worked was only what is labeled here transcription. So a segment of the DNA is unzipped and frees up, and he's correct too. The DNA resides in the nucleus of the cell. The translation of it happens in the cytoplasm, which is what this slide shows. But recently, this is where I mentioned before. The RNA, the free RNA in the cytoplasm, we don't have a wall here, but the RNA at this moment is in the cytoplasm, not in the nucleus. It came out of the nucleus. So they say, well, there is no way for that RNA to go back and combine with the original DNA. We do not know that. And it's total speculation. We do not know that.
That's really important. Definitively, we do not know what those people said is correct.
Right.
And they're speaking out of turn is what you're saying.
Right.
So that's very important.
And
Because,
it
go
is
ahead.
very possible, I'm sorry, it's very possible that he got the information from, because this is new information, that the RNA, in fact, crosses the nucleus wall, the wall of the nucleus back to recombine with the DNA, because that's where it is, in the chromosome, and there is just a marvelous way how this works, but it could go back. And that's called reverse transcription. Okay. A lot of people, a lot of scientists said that, but that's not, we don't know that.
It's speculation.
Right,
Okay.
it's speculation.
My name is Craig. In looking at everything that I've seen and listening to you, I've heard that I imagine the mRNA that creates this protein can then be passed down to my children. Is that correct?
The protein, probably the concern here, I think if I can guess where your question is going, the protein will probably have a relatively short life. I don't know how short, but it will not be permanently. The danger here is if there is a reverse transcription that will affect the DNA. then the person can pass it down to their children. And that's what my concern would be.
Okay, and with the reverse transcription and me passing this down to my children, is there any way that this could be used, like you were talking about the design baby and that? Is there any way that this could be used as a form of population control?
It would be, I guess the answer is possibly, but we have no clue what the results are going to be, because we don't know, or at least I don't know, where that's going to insert itself into the DNA if it goes back to recombine with the DNA.
So we just don't know, basically.
Right. We don't know. We'll probably not know for 20, 30 years until the tragedy is too late.
But your question does touch on the possibilities. Here's where you get into your speculation about what could happen. But we are in the tractor beam, if I could use a Star Wars expression, of this combination of government power and scientific capability. So if science crosses the threshold of capability, and they know that they can control produce children with certain traits and so forth, it's then a political question as to whether it can be used for population control. I don't think there's anybody that doubts that they wouldn't do it in China, but would they do it here? We're kind of inching in that direction, aren't we?
Was really came into my mind. Have we observed reverse transcription?
Yeah, that's as I said, for many, many years, we knew. In fact, it was called the DNA dogma, that it was only one way. That was the scientific knowledge, that's how it happens, and that's how the information gets into the cell to produce what the human body needs. But recently, and I really don't know what year, it has been observed. We know that reverse transcription takes place.
So let me pinpoint this, because really that's I think the key issue here, that we're really concerned about long-term impact of these RNA-based gene therapy, is that you have observed, and the medical community, the scientific community has observed reverse transcription, which means there can be altering of the DNA.
Right.
So my concern is, you're a smart guy. There's a lot of smart guys that are out there that have worked on this for Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, what's the other companies? Pfizer. AstraZeneca, okay? So why do you think that there's been this big push? Is it because we wanted to calm the scared public? Trump's trying to get a win, for his election. But in other words, has the dynamics of this unique situation caused us to use bad judgment concerning this jab or gene therapy?
It is very possible. The simple thinking was that injecting an mRNA to produce the spike protein will cause the cell to produce the antibodies. That's the kind of the thinking. But there is a whole bunch of other number of factors that has not been considered, and we don't know, especially when we realize that these long-term effects would take several years.
So a couple of takeaways in terms of action points. Number one, we've heard tonight that we should not be slaves to the virus. That's not saying we're not taking the virus seriously. Many who are in here have gotten it, survived. I mean, I survived the Hong Kong flu in 1969. That was worse than COVID, but we don't want to be slaves to the virus. What does that mean? That means that what we want to do is we want to be part of the public that begins to speak out and say we should be paying attention to our immune system. We have a capability to overcome all kinds of things. And I know we haven't talked about comorbidities or anything, but You know, each issue is responsible for itself, and so we have to deal with each of those things. But our own immune system ought to be the focus that we deal with. So I think that is a call to action. Secondly, I would think that we also need to develop alternatives to the vaccine. There's no talk, there's no discussion of alternatives, things that help to build up our immune system. There's no talk about getting through this with treatments. It's just simply vaccine. And the third thing that we've got as an action point is, you know, we can put men on the moon, we can do all kinds of wonderful things. Why are we still slaves to this old method of dealing with infectious, this approach dealing with infectious diseases called vaccines? And really, our scientific community ought to be working at coming up with better technology that's based on building up our own immune systems as answers, rather than having to mop up the spilled milk every time because we know the milk is going to spill. We can design a better glass, that kind of thing. These are things that you can do. These are also things you can talk about if you're in a public conversation. People say, well, we have to deal with reality. All right, good. Let's talk about dealing with reality. Here's 3 things that you could bring up and suggest in your conversations with your friends and others.